Have you ever noticed how the worst monsters often look the most ordinary? They smile at you in grocery stores, hold doors open, speak in calm voices. They blend into crowds like shadows in daylight. That's what makes them so terrifying. The most evil serial killers in history weren't always the ones who made headlines. Some stayed hidden for decades, picking off victims while maintaining perfect facades of normalcy. Tonight, we're diving into the twisted minds of five killers you've probably never heard of, but who left behind a trail of horror that still haunts investigators today. Albert Fish, the Brooklyn vampire who claimed to have eaten children. Edmund Kemper, the gentle giant who murdered his own mother. Randy Kraft, the scorecard killer with his coded list of victims. Dorothia Puente, the grandmotherly landlady who buried tenants in her garden. And Nanny Doss, the jolly black widow who poisoned her way through 4 husbands. These names don't roll off the tongue like Bundy or Dahmer, but their crimes are just as chilling, their methods just as calculated, and their victim count sometimes even higher. Let's start with a man whose very existence challenged everything people thought they knew about evil. Hamilton Howard, Albert Fish, was an American serial killer, rapist, child molester, and cannibal who committed at least 3 child murders between July 1924 and June 1928. He was also known as the Gray Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, and the Boogeyman. But to look at Albert Fish, you'd never suspect the monster lurking beneath his unremarkable exterior. Albert Fish was a slight, frail man, often described as gray-faced and inconspicuous. Small, quiet, and unassuming, he had a face that blended in with the crowd, and a private life that would have frightened even the most hardened criminals. The father of Hamilton Fish, who claimed descent from revolutionary stock, was 75 years old at Hamilton's birth. When the boy was 5, his father died, and his mother sent Albert to St. John's Orphanage, Washington, D.C. There, Fish changed his name to Albert. He also began stammering and wetting the bed. Worse, his sadomasochism flowered. "I saw so many boys whipped," he said. "It ruined my mind." The orphanage was where Fish's twisted psychology began to take shape. The constant beatings he witnessed and endured seemed to create a dangerous connection in his developing mind between pain and pleasure. He also enjoyed pushing needles deep into his skin. This self-torture would become a lifelong obsession. Psychiatrist Frederick Wertham's research, now stored in the Library of Congress, includes a now infamous X-ray of Fish's pelvic area and groin, in which the killer had inserted 27 needles. After leaving the orphanage, Fish's outward life appeared normal. In 1898, Fish married and fathered 6 children. The kids led average lives until 1917, when Fish's wife ran off with another man. But behind closed doors, Fish was already revealing his true nature. At that time, they recalled Fish occasionally asking them to participate in his sadomasochistic games. In one such game, he asked the children to paddle him with the nail-filled paddle until blood ran down his legs. According to Fish, in 1890, he relocated to New York, and began his crimes against children. He made money working as a prostitute and started to molest boys. He lured children from their homes, tortured them in various ways. His favorite was using a paddle laced with sharp nails, and then raped them. As time went on, his sexual fantasies with children grew more fiendish and bizarre, often ending in murdering and cannibalizing them. Fish had a method to his madness. Fish developed a skill for house painting and often worked in states across the country. Some believed he selected states largely populated with African Americans because he thought police would spend less time searching for the killer of African American children than Caucasian children. Thus, he selected black children to endure his torture using his instruments of hell, which included the paddle, a meat cleaver, and knives. He often chose people who were either mentally disabled or African American as his victims, later explaining that he assumed these people would not be missed when killed. The case that would ultimately lead to Fish's capture began in 1928. In 1928, Fish answered an ad from 18-year-old Edward Budd, who was looking for part-time work to help with the family finances. Fish, who introduced himself as Mr. Frank Howard, met with Edwards and his family to discuss Edward's future. Fish told the family that he was a Long Island farmer looking to pay a strong young worker $15 a week. The job seemed ideal, and the Budd family, excited by Edward's luck in finding the job, instantly trusted the gentle, polite Mr. Howard. But Fish had other plans. During his visit, Howard spotted Budd's younger sister, Gracie. He persuaded the parents, Delia Bridget Flanagan and Albert Francis Budd Sr., to let Grace accompany him to the party that evening. That was the last time the Budd family would see their 10-year-old daughter alive. Fish subsequently took Grace to an abandoned house he had previously picked out to use for the murder of his next victim, Wisteria Cottage at 359 Mountain Road, located in the East Irvington neighborhood of Irvington, New York. There, Fish manually strangled her to death, then decapitated and dismembered her body, and ate most of the remains over the next several days. For 6 years, the Budd family lived in agony, not knowing what happened to their daughter. It was a 6-year mystery that haunted Grace's parents, who felt immense guilt for trusting a random gray-haired figure to take their daughter under the guise of attending a birthday party. As the years went by, they held out hope they'd be reunited with their darling daughter, praying that she was secretly being raised in a different city. Then came the letter that would shatter their world. But those hopes were dashed when they received a now infamous letter from the killer himself in November of 1934, detailing Fish's crimes. The letter was so graphic and disturbing that it cannot be read in full here, but it detailed exactly what Fish had done to Grace, how he had cooked and eaten parts of her body over several days. The letter that was received by the Budd family was investigated and was found to contain an emblem of the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. All of the members were required to obtain a handwriting test for comparison to the letters from Howard. A janitor came forward to admit that he had taken some sheets of paper and left them in his old rooming house. The landlady was able to confirm that an old man matching the description had lived there for 2 months and had only checked out a few days earlier. The former tenant was identified as Albert H. Fish. The landlady also mentioned that he wanted her to hold a letter that would be arriving from his son. Detectives intercepted the letter at the post office and were contacted by the landlady that he would be coming to get his letter. When police finally arrested Fish, he didn't deny anything. To their surprise, Fish confessed in an instant, practically tripping over himself to reveal the precise details of what he'd done to Grace Budd, as well as dozens of other children. After his capture, he admitted to molesting more than 400 children and torturing and killing several of them, though it wasn't known if his statement was true. Fish once boasted that he had children in every state, and at one time stated his number of victims was about 100. However, it is not known whether he was referring to rapes or cannibalization, nor is it known if the statement was truthful. Detective William King, who tirelessly tracked down Fish, suspected Fish murdered 4 children in New York City alone. Psychiatrist Frederick Wortham believed Fish killed at least 5, and the police estimated he killed between 8 and 15 children. However, Fish attacked perhaps hundreds of children. At his trial, Fish's defense team tried to argue insanity. On March 11, 1935, Fish's trial began, and he pleaded innocent by reason of insanity. He said voices in his head told him to kill children and commit other horrendous crimes. Despite the numerous psychiatrists who described Fish as insane, the jury found him sane and guilty after a 10-day trial. When asked by the judge what he thought his punishment should be, Kemper said that he should be tortured to death. He was sentenced to die by electrocution. On January 16, 1936, Fish was electrocuted at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York, reportedly a process Fish looked upon as the ultimate sexual thrill, though later that assessment was dismissed as rumor. Even in death, Albert Fish remained an enigma of calculated evil disguised as a harmless old man. The true horror of Fish's crimes wasn't just their brutality, but how long he operated undetected. For decades, this gray-haired grandfather figure moved through society, targeting the most vulnerable while maintaining a facade of respectability. His ability to blend in, to seem trustworthy, made him perhaps more dangerous than any monster hiding in the shadows. Fish proved that evil doesn't always announce itself with violence and rage. Sometimes it comes wearing the mask of kindness, offering candy to children and jobs to desperate families, speaking in gentle tones while harboring the darkest of intentions. Now let's turn to a different kind of monster, one whose physical presence alone should have been a warning, but whose intelligence and charm made him equally deadly. Edmund Kemper was everything Albert Fish wasn't: physically imposing, brilliant, and articulate. Edmund Emil Kemper III was an American serial killer convicted of murdering 7 women and 1 girl between May 1972 and April 1973. But like Fish, Kemper's killing spree didn't begin in adulthood. Years earlier, at the age of 15, Kemper had murdered his paternal grandparents. On August 27, 1964, at the age of 15, Kemper killed his grandmother, Maud Matilda Kemper, with a rifle after an argument, shooting her once in the head and twice in the back, then stabbing her several times. When Kemper's grandfather, Edmund Emil Kemper Sr., came home, Kemper fatally shot him in the driveway. Kemper phoned his mother, who told him to call police. Kemper did so and waited for police to arrive. Kemper told police that he just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma, and later said he killed his grandfather because he would be angry with Kemper. That chilling statement, spoken by a 15-year-old boy, should have been a warning of what was to come. Kemper's crimes were deemed incomprehensible for a 15-year-old to commit, and court psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. He was sent to Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility in San Luis Obispo County that houses mentally ill convicts. In 1969, Kemper was released at the age of 21, despite his prison doctor's recommendation that he does not live with his mother because of her past abuse and his psychological issues involving her. He rejoined her in Santa Cruz, California, where she had moved after ending her third marriage to take a job with the University of California. The relationship between Kemper and his mother was toxic from the beginning. Kemper was born on December 18, 1948, in Burbank, California, the middle child of E. and Clarnell Kemper. After his parents' divorce in 1957, he moved with his mother and two sisters to Montana. Kemper had a difficult relationship with his alcoholic mother, as she was very critical of him, and he blamed her for all of his problems. His mother, Clarnell Elizabeth Kemper, was an alcoholic who possibly suffered from borderline personality disorder. Her erratic behavior once led Kemper's father, a World War II veteran named Edmund Kemper II, to remark, "Suicide missions in wartime and the later atomic bomb testings were nothing compared to living with Clarnell." But what made Kemper particularly dangerous wasn't just his size or his traumatic childhood. His high IQ of 145 only made him more dangerous, as he used his intelligence to slip away from his crime scenes undetected. FBI profiler John E. Douglas described Kemper as among the brightest prison inmates he interviewed and capable of rare insight for a violent criminal. He further added that he personally liked Kemper, referring to him as friendly, open, sensitive, and having a good sense of humor. After his release from the hospital, Kemper initially seemed to be integrating back into society. Upon release, he drifted, picking up and releasing female hitchhikers. But he soon stopped letting them go, killing 6 young women in the Santa Cruz, California area in the 1970s. The man known as the Ogre of Aptos, for his 6-foot 9-inch frame, would pick up hitchhiking UC Santa Cruz and Cabrillo College students, thus gaining the other nickname the Co-Ed Butcher. He buried his victims all over Santa Cruz County, including near Summit Road in the Santa Cruz Mountains and his Aptos home's backyard. Kemper's method was as calculated as it was horrifying. He would cruise the highways around the University of California Santa Cruz campus, looking for young women hitchhiking. His massive size and friendly demeanor made him seem like a safe ride. Ed Kemper was a cunning serial killer who raped corpses, mutilated dead bodies, and buried his victims' heads in his backyard. A lust killer who savored the act of decapitating his victims and often used their severed heads for sexual pleasure. Kemper's story is particularly twisted among historical serial killers. Kemper once buried the severed head of a victim in his mother's garden, facing her bedroom because she always wanted people to look up to her. This grotesque act revealed the depth of his hatred for his mother and how it fueled his crimes against other women. The end came in the April 1973, when Kemper finally turned his rage on the source of his torment. In April 1973, Kemper committed what would be his last 2 murders. On Good Friday, he went to his mother's home, where the two had an unpleasant exchange. Kemper attacked his mother after she went to sleep, first striking her in the head with a hammer and then cutting her throat with a knife. As he had with his other victims, he then decapitated her and cut off her hands, but then also removed her larynx and put it down the garbage disposal. After hiding his mother's body parts, Kemper called his mother's friend Sally Hallett and invited her over to the house. After killing his mother's friend as well, something in Kemper seemed to break. He later turned himself in after calling Santa Cruz police from a payphone and confessing his crimes. Charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder, Kemper went on trial for his crimes in October 1973. He was found guilty of all of the charges in early November. The case had a profound impact on law enforcement's understanding of serial killers. However, Kemper's discussions with Robert Ressler changed how the FBI conducted interviews with serial killers. According to Ann Burgess, Kemper told Ressler at the end of one of their interviews, "The guard isn't coming back. They're on change of shift. He's not going to be here for 30 minutes. In that time, I could snap your head and leave it on the table. I'd own the prison then. I killed an FBI agent." After the guard came back, Kemper said he was joking. Regardless, FBI agents were required to conduct interviews in pairs and could no longer do this alone. Today, Edmund Kemper, now 75, was denied parole again and has spent the last 51 years incarcerated for the killings of 7 women and 1 girl between 1972 and 1973 in Santa Cruz County. He is currently locked in a Vacaville psychiatric center, serving a life sentence. He is confined to a wheelchair, incontinent, and generally in poor health. His recent psychological assessment labeled him a high risk for recidivism, partly due to a 2022 incident where he inappropriately touched a prison staff member during a diaper change. Edmund Kemper represents a different kind of evil than Albert Fish. Where Fish was small and unassuming, Kemper was impossible to ignore physically. But both men shared the same ability to manipulate and deceive, to present themselves as harmless while harboring the darkest of intentions. Kemper's intelligence made him arguably more dangerous, as he could analyze his own behavior, understand what drove him to kill, yet continue killing anyway. His case forever changed how law enforcement approaches serial killers, proving that even the most cooperative and insightful criminals can still be absolutely deadly. Now his crimes spread far beyond California. At the time of his conviction, Kraft was believed to be the most prolific serial killer in the U.S. to that point. Although his total may have since been eclipsed, Kraft was convicted for 16 murders and is suspected of at least 65 others and potentially 100 or more unsolved murders in California, but his killing spree crossed state lines. The majority of Kraft's murders were committed in California, although some victims had been killed in Oregon, with 2 further known victims murdered in Michigan in December 1982. Randy Kraft was born in 1945 in Long Beach, a seemingly ordinary man who would become anything but ordinary. Randy Kraft, better known by his moniker the Scorecard Killer, was born in Long Beach in 1945. After graduating Claremont College, he joined the Air Force, but was discharged for medical reasons in 1969 after Kraft told higher-ups that he was gay. It was shortly after this discharge that his deadly transformation began. What made Kraft so dangerous was his methodical approach to murder. Shortly after that, detectives believe Kraft began prowling Southern California for victims. He targeted dozens of men, often members of the military, and would drug them with alcohol and tranquilizers before abusing and killing them. He was calculating, efficient, and disturbingly organized in his brutality. The method was always the same. Kraft would cruise the highways at night, looking for hitchhikers, young men on their way to or from military bases, anyone who might be traveling alone. Prosecutors believe Kraft, who became known as the scorecard killer because of the list, would give his victims drugs and alcohol, strangle them to death, and sexually disfigure them. He didn't kill in fits of rage. This was calculated predation, each murder carried out with chilling precision. Among his most horrific crimes was the torture and murder of 22-year-old Mark Howard Hall. In the case of one victim, 22-year-old Mark Howard Hall, police believed Kraft used a cigarette lighter to burn the man's eyes and body. Hall was found dumped in Silverado Canyon in January 1976, his mouth filled with dirt and his genitals missing. This wasn't just murder, it was systematic torture that defied comprehension. What truly distinguished Kraft from other killers was his record keeping. A search of the car's trunk turned up a notebook that contained what prosecutors claimed was a coded death list containing over 60 entries. This list, which earned him the nickname the Scorecard Killer, was like a twisted trophy collection, each cryptic entry representing a life he had taken. For years, Kraft evaded capture partly because he shared the same hunting grounds and methods as two other serial killers. In addition to Kraft, William Bonin and Patrick Kearney independently roamed Southern California and overlapped in their years of offering fatal transport. The trio and their accomplices may have killed upwards of 150. At different times, all three were conflated and referred to as the freeway killer because of similarities in their methods. Kraft's downfall came on May 14th, 1983, when his own arrogance finally caught up with him. Around 1 a.m. on May 14th, 1983, the California Highway Patrol pulled Kraft over because he was weaving on the freeway near Mission Viejo. They placed Kraft, then 38, under arrest after they found 25-year-old Marine Terry Gambrell dead in the front seat of the vehicle, according to the Los Angeles Times. Suspecting the driver was drunk, CHP officers were shocked to find a young man slumped over in the passenger seat. He was dead. This discovery unleashed a flood of evidence. Firstly, the cops found nearly 50 Polaroid pictures, all of which were of naked young males who seemed unconscious or even dead. These were speculated to be the memorabilia that Kraft had collected from each of his murders as a prize. Articles of clothing that belonged to the victims were found in his home. The fiber of the rug in his apartment also matched those discovered at the crime scenes. In May 1989, a jury found Kraft guilty of 16 counts of murder in Orange County. He was never charged or convicted in connection with the dozens of other killings he's suspected of committing in Southern California, Oregon, or Michigan. That November, Santa Ana Superior Court Judge Donald A. McCartan sentenced Kraft to death. I can't imagine doing these things in scientific experiments on a dead person, much less someone alive, the judge said of Kraft's brutality, according to the Los Angeles Times. Kraft, 78, remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison. Despite decades behind bars, he has never confessed, never shown remorse, and the true extent of his crimes may never be known. Prosecutors at the time said he may be the worst serial killer in the nation's history. What makes Kraft's case particularly disturbing is how recent investigations continue to uncover new victims. The suspected victim of a convicted serial killer has been identified using investigative genetic genealogy nearly 50 years after his body was found near a California trail, authorities said. Michael Ray Schlicht is believed to be an early victim of infamous serial killer Randy Kraft, who was sentenced to death in 1989 for the brutal murders of 16 young men in Orange County between 1972 and 1983, according to the Orange County Sheriff's Department. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Kraft's story is how mundane he appeared to everyone around him. Randy Kraft looked nothing like how the media portrays a serial killer. He looked like everyone else. I thought, really? That's the scorecard killer? To his co-workers at a computer company, he was just another quiet, reliable employee. To his neighbors, he was unremarkable, polite, ordinary. And yet somehow Kraft has been curiously overlooked. The weird part is, a lot of people don't know about him, Salcedo said. Randy Kraft is the perfect case. No one really knows about his killings. He's untapped. Now let's turn to a killer whose methods were completely different, but whose evil was just as profound. If Randy Kraft's represented calculated efficiency, then our next subject represented something far more insidious. She was a grandmother who baked cookies, tended roses, and presented herself as a caring caretaker of society's most vulnerable. But beneath this facade of kindness lay one of California's most depraved murderers. Dorothea Puente looked exactly like what central casting would order for a sweet, harmless grandmother. Dorothea Puente looked like a sweet grandmother, but looks can be deceiving. In fact, Puente was a serial killer who committed at least 9 murders inside her boarding house in Sacramento, California throughout the 1980s. She wore vintage dresses, thick glasses, and kept her graying hair in a neat bun. She baked tamales for her neighbors, attended church regularly, and ran a boarding house for Sacramento's most vulnerable residents. But white-haired landlady, who handed out homemade tamales and fussed over her rose beds and vegetable garden, as the Sacktown magazine once described her, had been hiding a dark secret behind her good deeds. Born Dorothea Helen Gray in 1929 in Redlands, California, her early life was marked by tragedy and dysfunction. Dorothea Puente was born Dorothea Helen Gray on January 9th, 1929, in Redlands, California, to Trudy May, née Yates, and Jesse James Gray. She would marry and divorce multiple times throughout her life, each relationship ending in failure, often accompanied by accusations of theft, fraud, or worse. In the 1980s, Puente established herself as a boarding house operator in Sacramento, specifically targeting society's most invisible members. She established herself as a genuine resource to the community to aid alcoholics, homeless people, and the mentally ill by holding Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and assisting individuals to sign up to receive Social Security benefits. Throughout the 1980s, Puente opened her home as a boarding home to people with mental health and substance abuse issues, according to Sacktown. What made Puente's crimes so particularly vicious was her systematic exploitation of the most vulnerable people in society. Between 1982 and 1988, the elderly and disabled people living in Dorothea Puente's house had no idea that she was poisoning and strangling some of her guests before burying them on her property and cashing their Social Security checks. Puente murdered several of her tenants over the years and collected their Social Security checks, according to local KGPE. Her victims were people society had forgotten. For years, the disappearances of these so-called shadow people who lived at the margins of society went unnoticed. Homeless individuals, elderly people with no family, mentally ill patients who had nowhere else to go. These were people who wouldn't be missed, at least not quickly, and Puente knew it. The pattern was always the same. She would welcome new tenants with warmth and seeming compassion, help them navigate the social services system, cook for them, and present herself as their benevolent caretaker. Then, once she had gained their trust and access to their financial benefits, she would poison them with a mixture of drugs and alcohol. The outlet reports that Puente would even continue to write letters to her tenants' family members for months following their deaths in order to cover her tracks and lead the families to believe nothing was wrong. After murdering her victims, Puente would bury their bodies in her garden and continue collecting their Social Security checks. She maintained the illusion that they were still alive by forging letters and documents, sometimes for months or even years after their deaths. It was the perfect crime, targeting people who existed at the margins of society, people whose absences wouldn't immediately raise alarm bells. The unraveling began in 1988 when social worker Judy Moyes became concerned about one of her clients. In February of 1988, Puente took Alvaro Bert Montoya into her care after social worker Judy Moyes recommended him, according to Sacktown. But when the 52-year-old man who was experiencing homelessness stopped showing up to meetings with Moise, she grew concerned and then suspicious after Puente gave inconsistent answers about where Montoya had gone. When police arrived at the house to ask about Montoya, they eventually searched the yard, where they dug up 7 bodies in total. Police discovered the remains of 7 bodies in her yard. 2 other bodies were found in the Sacramento River, including that of her former boyfriend. The discovery shocked Sacramento and revealed the full extent of Puente's horrific crimes. Among the victims found buried in her garden were Leona Carpenter, 81, Dorothy Miller, 65, Alvaro Montoya, 52, Benjamin Fink, 55, James Gallup, 64, Vera Faye Martin, 65, and Betty Palmer, 80. Each had trusted Puente with their lives, and each had paid the ultimate price for that trust. When the bodies were discovered, Puente didn't stick around to face justice. Puente fled to Los Angeles, where she was recognized for being on the news. Los Angeles police officers arrested Puente, and she was taken back to Sacramento. But here's the thing about Nanny Doss that made her so terrifying. She looked exactly like what she claimed to be. Gleeful serial killer Nancy Nanny Doss, Hazel was known alternately as the Giggling Granny, the Giggling Nanny, the Jolly Black Widow, the Lonely Hearts Killer, Lady Bluebeard, and, as one newspaper dubbed her, the Self-Made Widow. Doss was also referred to as the Giggling Granny, the Lonely Hearts Killer, the Black Widow, and Lady Bluebeard. She was a smiling, cheerful grandmother who baked pies and tended to her garden. But behind that facade was one of the most methodical and cold-blooded killers in American history. Nanny Doss, born Nancy Hazel, November 4th, 1905, June 2nd, 1965, was an American serial killer responsible for the deaths of 11 people between 1927 and 1954. In all, it was revealed that she had killed 4 husbands, 2 children, one of her sisters, her mother, 2 grandsons, and a mother-in-law. What set Nanny apart from other serial killers wasn't just her method, it was her motivation. She didn't kill for money, though she collected insurance payouts. She didn't kill for power or control. She killed because her victims simply weren't living up to her romantic fantasies. Nanny was born on November 4th, 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama, now part of Anniston. Both Nanny and her mother hated James, who was a controlling and abusive father and husband. James would force his children to work on the family farm, refusing to let them attend school, which resulted in Nanny's poor academic performance. From an early age, Nanny escaped into romance magazines, devouring stories of perfect love and ideal husbands. These magazines became her blueprint for how relationships should work, and when reality didn't match her expectations, she simply eliminated the problem. Her first taste of murder came during her first marriage to Charlie Braggs. In 1927, the couple lost their 2 middle girls to suspected food poisoning. Soon after, Braggs took firstborn daughter Melvina and fled, leaving newborn Florin behind. Braggs always maintained he left her because he was frightened of her. Charlie would become the only husband to survive Nanny Doss, and only because he ran for his life when he started noticing the pattern of deaths around his wife. What makes Nanny's crimes so chilling is how she escalated. Her second marriage was to Robert Franklin Harrelson, an alcoholic from Jacksonville. After a few months, she discovered that he was an alcoholic and had a criminal record for assault. Despite this, the marriage lasted 16 years. During this time, Nanny's killing spree expanded beyond just her husband. Exhausted from labor and groggy from ether, Melvina thought she saw her visiting mother stick a hat pin into the baby's head. When she asked her husband and sister for clarification, they said Nanny had told them the baby was dead, and they noticed that she was holding a pin. Think about that for a moment. Nanny murdered her own newborn granddaughter with a hat pin right there in the hospital room while her daughter was recovering from childbirth. But she wasn't done. Nanny disapproved of him, and while Melvina was visiting her father after a particularly nasty fight with her mother, her son Robert died mysteriously under Nanny's care on July 7th, 1945. The death was diagnosed as asphyxia from unknown causes, and 2 months later, Nanny collected the $500 life insurance she had taken out on Robert. The next day, she put rat poison in Harrelson's corn whiskey jar, and he died that evening. Nanny had found her preferred method, poison. It was quiet, it looked natural, and it allowed her to play the grieving widow while collecting on insurance policies. Her third husband, Arlie Lanning, lasted from 1947 to 1950, but Nanny was getting bolder and more confident in her methods. When Lanning died suddenly of what appeared to be heart failure, nobody questioned the timing. Why would they? Nanny was just a sweet grandmother who'd had terrible luck with men, but that luck extended to everyone around her. Before she poisoned him, she poisoned her mother, Louisa, in January 1953 when she came to live with them. Morton died 3 months later, on May 19th, 1953. Her fourth husband, Richard Morton, whom she met through a Lonely Hearts column, discovered what happened when you disappointed Nanny Doss. He did not have a drinking problem, but he was adulterous. That was enough for Nanny. But before she dealt with Morton, she had other business to attend to. First her mother, then Morton himself. By the time she married her fifth and final husband, Samuel Doss, in 1953, Nanny had perfected her routine. Nanny married Samuel Doss of Tulsa, Oklahoma, in June 1953. Doss was a Nazarene minister who had lost his family to a tornado in Carroll County, Arkansas. Samuel should have been perfect for her. He was kind, religious, and genuinely caring. But he made one fatal mistake. Samuel disapproved of the romance novels and stories that his wife adored. That was it. That was enough to seal his death warrant. In September 1954, Samuel was admitted to the hospital with flu-like symptoms. The hospital diagnosed a severe digestive tract infection. He was treated and released on October 5th, but Nanny wasn't finished with him yet. Samuel died on October 12th, 1954. Nanny killed him that evening in her rush to collect the 2 life insurance policies she had taken out on him. This time, though, Nanny's luck ran out. This sudden death alerted his doctor, who ordered an autopsy. The autopsy revealed a huge amount of arsenic in his system. When confronted by police, something remarkable happened. Instead of denying everything, Nanny started laughing. She actually giggled as she confessed to her crimes. Under interrogation, and in return for being able to keep a romance magazine, Nanny confessed to killing her husbands. The media couldn't get enough of her. Here was a grandmother who'd poisoned her way through multiple families, and she was treating it like a joke. Meanwhile, journalists gave her the moniker Giggling Granny because every time she would tell her story, she laughed. But despite being a horrific murderer, Doss seemed to enjoy the limelight of her arrest. She often joked about her dead husbands and the methods in which she used to kill them. What investigators discovered during their investigation was a pattern of death that stretched back decades. Authorities exhumed the bodies of 8 of Nanny Doss's supposed victims and confirmed all 4 of her husbands and her mother died of arsenic. Tulsa World reports Nanny Doss collected more than $7,000 in life insurance following the deaths of her daughters and 4 husbands. But the money wasn't really the point for Nanny. Doss's friends and family said she seemed to enjoy planning funerals and writing death announcements and eulogies. According to some reports, Nanny Doss hired photographers to attend the funerals of her victims and take her picture with the attendees. Think about that. She was posing for photographs at the funerals of people she'd murdered. The level of coldness, the complete lack of empathy, is almost incomprehensible. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was methodical, calculated evil disguised as small-town charm. She pled guilty on May 17, 1955, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. The state did not pursue the death penalty due to her sex. Doss was never charged with the other deaths. She died from leukemia in the hospital ward of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in 1965. Even in prison, Nanny maintained her cheerful demeanor, continuing to insist that she'd only been looking for true love and that her husbands had simply disappointed her. The case of Nanny Doss reveals something deeply disturbing about how we perceive danger. She killed more people than many famous serial killers, operated for nearly 3 decades, and did it all while maintaining the perfect image of a loving grandmother. Her victims trusted her completely: husbands, children, grandchildren, her own mother. They ate her food, drank her coffee, and never suspected that the woman caring for them was slowly poisoning them to death. What's perhaps most terrifying about these 5 killers, Albert Fish, Edmund Kemper, Randy Kraft, Dorothea Puente, and Nanny Doss, is how they shatter our assumptions about evil. Fish looked like a harmless grandfather. Kemper was articulate and intelligent, even helping solve crimes while imprisoned. Kraft was a successful computer programmer, living a quiet suburban life. Puente was everybody's idea of a caring landlady, and Nanny was the definition of a sweet grandmother. They remind us that evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious warning signs. Sometimes it smiles, offers help, and gains your trust before it destroys you. These killers understood that their ordinary appearances were their greatest weapons. They weaponized trust, kindness, and social expectations to access victims who never saw them coming. The crimes of these lesser-known serial killers prove that some of the most dangerous predators are those who blend seamlessly into society. They don't lurk in the shadows. They operate in plain sight, protected by our assumptions about who could and couldn't be capable of such horrors. Their stories serve as chilling reminders that true evil often wears the most innocent faces, and that sometimes the person offering help is the one you should fear most. Now let me search for information about Dorothea Puente's boarding house crimes. Now let me search for information about Nanny Doss to complete the script. Randy Kraft was already known to police, but lived in the shadows. For years he had been active as what authorities called one of the freeway killers, a name that covered 3 separate predators hunting along California's highways. While his contemporaries, Patrick Kearney and William Bonin, eventually gained notoriety, a lot of people don't know about him. No one really knows about his killings. Randy Kraft perfected the art of vanishing in plain sight. Born in 1945 in conservative Orange County, he graduated high school in 1963 and enrolled in Claremont Men's College and joined the Reserve Officer Training Corps. For a while, he continued to remain conservative, demonstrating in favor of the Vietnam War and campaigning for Republican candidate Barry Goldwater. He seemed destined for a conventional life. But something shifted. His political views changed, his social circle evolved, and behind the mask of respectability, a meticulous killer was emerging. Kraft was a seemingly normal kid. He was a member of the Boy Scouts, part of his school's debate team, and even joined the tennis team. He attended accelerated classes and was an honors student. Friends would later struggle to reconcile the Randy they knew with the monster he became. It is incongruous that the Randy Kraft I knew could ever commit such crimes, one former friend would say. The crimes of Randolph Kraft include the raping, torturing, and killing of 16 young males in a span of 11 years from 1972. They happened in the state of California, Oregon, and Michigan, but these were only the confirmed victims. The true horror of Randy Kraft lay in his organization. This list of messages, later known as the scorecard, ended up giving Kraft his title as the scorecard killer. Kraft was referred to as the scorecard killer for a coded list of more than 60 entries believed to correspond to victims. The scorecard was a testament to methodical evil. Entries like stable, Airplane Hill, and New Year's Eve weren't random words. Kraft's scorecard, on which he listed his victims by strange nicknames related to their locations or personal habits, such as deodorant, New Year's Eve, and Iowa. Kraft claimed the terms on the list referred to sexual encounters he'd had and other mundane things. Each cryptic phrase corresponded to a life destroyed. Kraft only targeted white males who shared a similar appearance. He hunted hitchhikers, young Marines, men who were vulnerable and unlikely to be missed quickly. His method was clinical: approach with kindness, offer a ride, then poison or drug his victims before subjecting them to torture and sexual violence. Kraft was known for being a gay murderer who raped, photographed, and dismembered his male victims. His victims usually suffered a brutal death, including sodomy, strangulation, and mutilation. The end came in 1983 during what should have been a routine traffic stop. Pulled over by 2 highway patrol officers for driving erratically on Interstate 5. Patrol officers went to speak with the passenger in Kraft's car, only to find him dead. A routine stop of what officers thought was a drunk driver led to the capture of one of America's biggest serial killers. The search of his home revealed the full scope of his crimes. A host of additional evidence surfaced after searching his apartment. Articles of clothing that belonged to the victims were found in his home. The fiber of the rug in his apartment also matched those discovered at the crime scenes. The scorecard found in his car became the key to unlocking years of unsolved murders. At the time of his conviction, Kraft was believed to be the most prolific serial killer in the U.S. to that point. Although his total may have since been eclipsed, Kraft was convicted for 16 murders and is suspected of at least 65 others and potentially 100 or more unsolved murders. Even today, as recently as November 2023, the remains of a teenager believed to have been killed by Kraft nearly 50 years ago were identified using investigative genetic genealogy. The so-called scorecard killer, Kraft is believed to have tortured and killed dozens more victims. What made Kraft particularly terrifying was his ordinariness. Randy Kraft looked nothing like how the media portrays a serial killer. He looked like everyone else. He's not the prototypical media version of what a killer looks like. Monsters are rarely what you expect, and this guy was a definition of the banality of evil. He was the perfect predator, invisible, methodical, and utterly without conscience. While Randy Kraft methodically stalked California's highways across the country in Sacramento, another killer was perfecting a different kind of horror. Dorothia Puente understood that society's most vulnerable made the perfect victims because their disappearances would barely register as ripples in an indifferent world. In the 1980s, she ran a boarding house in Sacramento, California, and murdered various elderly and mentally disabled boarders before cashing their Social Security checks. To most observers, Puente was a godsend. She established herself as a genuine resource to the community to aid alcoholics, homeless people, and the mentally ill by holding Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and assisting individuals to sign up to receive Social Security benefits. Dorothea Puente had cultivated her image carefully. She changed her public image to that of a respectable older matron by putting on vintage clothing, wearing large glasses, and not dyeing her graying hair. She was exactly what people expected to see, a kindly landlady who took in society's cast-offs out of the goodness of her heart. To many, Dorothea Puente seemed like an angel. The older woman presented herself as a caretaker, running a boarding house in Sacramento, California, that took in the kind of people society often abandons: the homeless, the elderly, the disabled, the mentally ill. But beneath this carefully constructed facade was a predator who had found the perfect hunting ground. Between 1982 and 1988, the elderly and disabled people living in Dorothea Puente's house had no idea that she was poisoning and strangling some of her guests before burying them on her property and cashing their Social Security checks. For years, the disappearances of these so-called shadow people who lived at the margins of society went unnoticed. Puente's operation was brutally efficient. She would read all of her tenants' mail and take any money or Social Security checks that they received. While she would give all her tenants monthly stipends, Puente would keep the remainder of their money, claiming it was needed for expenses. When tenants became troublesome or their benefits ran out, they simply disappeared. On October 2nd, 1987, Vera Faye Martin, 61, was sent to live with Puente. Beginning on October 5th, 1987, Puente forged a number of Martin's Social Security checks, totaling over $7,000. On October 19th, 1987, Martin failed to contact her daughter on her birthday, as she had done each year. In November 1988, Martin's body was found buried under a metal shed in Puente's yard. The grisly details of her crimes defied comprehension. Vera Faye Martin was a 64-year-old resident of Puente's boarding house. Investigators believe she may have been buried alive. Patterns in the dirt around her body indicated that she may have been attempting to claw her way out of the shallow grave in the backyard. Her wristwatch was still ticking when she was discovered. The methodical nature of Puente's killings showed a level of planning that was chilling. Betty Palmer was a 78-year-old tenant who lived at the boarding house. She was found buried in the backyard without her head, hands, and feet. Puente dismembered some victims to make identification difficult and disposal easier. Puente, who took in people who were older, disabled, or otherwise ailing, would steal their Social Security and benefits checks and poison them by lacing their food with prescription medicine. Prosecutors would later allege she pulled in over $87,000 from her scam and spent some of the cash on a facelift. For Puente, murder was simply a business expense. The end came when one victim couldn't be so easily explained away. People started becoming suspicious in November 1988 when Alvaro Montoya, a disabled man with schizophrenia, disappeared. His social worker had reported him missing when he missed his meetings. When police arrived at the house to ask about Montoya, they eventually searched the yard, where they dug up 7 bodies in total. Puente was charged with 9 counts of murder, including for the deaths of Gilmouth and Monroe, but she was only convicted of 3, with the jury deadlocking on 6 of the cases. Buried in her backyard were the bodies of Leona Carpenter, 81, Dorothy Miller, 65, Alvaro Montoya, 52, Benjamin Fink, 55, James Gallup, 64, Vera Faye Martin, 65, and Betty Palmer, 80. Even after her capture, Puente maintained the illusion of innocence. Until her own death, Puente had always maintained that her tenants had died of natural causes. She had the perfect crime going on here in this house, and nobody knew about it. It was right under the nose of everybody. While Puente turned her boarding house into a house of horrors, in the American South, another grandmother was writing her own chapter of family annihilation. Nanny Doss perfected the art of domestic murder, turning family gatherings into crime scenes with a smile that never wavered. Nanny Doss may have seemed like a loving grandmother with a charming smile, as one local Oklahoma newspaper described her, but investigators began to suspect there was something sinister behind that smile after every member of her family mysteriously died, one by one, over the years. In the end, the giggling granny admitted to murdering 11 of her family members. Born Nancy Hazel in 1905 in rural Alabama, both Nanny and her mother hated James, who was a controlling and abusive father and husband. James would force his children to work on the family farm, refusing to let them attend school, which resulted in Nanny's poor academic performance. From childhood, Nanny found escape in romance magazines, feeding fantasies of perfect love that would shape her lethal approach to relationships. By the time she was a teenager, Doss dreamed of living an idyllic life with her future husband. Reading romance magazines, especially the Lonely Hearts columns, took up much of the young lady's spare time. Perhaps she used the romance magazines as an escape from her abusive father while her mother turned a blind eye. The killing began early in her first marriage. She and her first husband, Charlie Braggs, had 4 daughters between 1923 to 27 while living with his mother. 2 of her daughters suddenly died in 1927 from suspected food poisoning, prompting Braggs to become suspicious and leave his wife, taking his oldest daughter Melvina with him. Remarkably, Braggs would be the only husband to escape. What often distinguishes the most chilling serial killers isn't their brutality alone, but their ability to blend seamlessly into society. Fish was a small, gentle-looking man who appeared kind and trusting, yet once alone with his victims, the monster inside him was unleashed, a monster so perverse and cruel that his crimes seem unbelievable. This same deceptive normalcy would become the hallmark of our next killer. Edmund Kemper stood 6 feet 9 inches tall and weighed nearly 300 pounds. To most who knew him, he was simply Big Ed, a gentle giant who hung around police stations and seemed harmless enough. They knew and liked Big Ed, the 6 feet 9 inches local man who was always hanging around and seemed like nothing more than a gentle giant. But behind that unassuming exterior lurked one of the most terrifying and intelligent serial killers in American history. Born in 1948 in Burbank, California, Edmund Emil Kemper III was destined for darkness from an early age. Kemper had a severely dysfunctional relationship with his mother, a neurotic, domineering alcoholic who he claims frequently belittled, humiliated, and abused him. His father left when Edmund was 9, and without that stabilizing presence, the boy's violent tendencies began to emerge. At the age of 10, he buried a family cat alive, then dug up its body, decapitated it, and mounted its head on a spike. When his family's second cat disappeared, Edmund had killed that one too. These weren't the actions of a confused child. They were rehearsals for what was to come. At 15, Edmund's escalating behavior finally reached its horrific peak. Living with his grandparents on their remote California ranch, he decided, as he would later tell psychiatrists, that he wanted to see what it felt like to kill someone. So how did Kemper manage to get released on parole after shooting his grandparents in the back of their heads with a rifle? On that August day in 1964, he shot his grandmother in the head while she sat at the kitchen table, then waited for his grandfather to return home and killed him too. When police arrived, Edmund was sitting calmly on the porch. He told them he had killed his grandparents because he was curious about what it would feel like. There was no remorse, no emotion, just cold calculation. He was sent to Atascadero State Hospital, where psychiatrists worked to understand what had driven a 15-year-old to commit such acts. The most chilling part? The system believed he could be rehabilitated. Kemper was released on parole on his 21st birthday. He had spent fewer than 6 years in confinement for double murder, and his juvenile record was sealed. To the outside world, Edmund Kemper was a young man who had made mistakes but deserved a second chance. For a while, it seemed like the treatment had worked. Edmund moved back to Santa Cruz to live with his mother, the same woman whose abuse had contributed to his psychological damage. He took a series of jobs and even applied to become a California Highway Patrol officer. He was rejected, ironically, because at 6 feet 9 inches and nearly 300 pounds, he was too large to fit in the patrol cars. But beneath the surface, Edmund was planning. His high IQ of 145 only made him more dangerous, as he used his intelligence to slip away from his crime scenes undetected. He studied police procedures, hung around cop bars, and even befriended local officers. They had no idea they were socializing with a killer who was learning their methods and preparing to use that knowledge against them. In May 1972, Edmund picked up his first victims since his release. 2 18-year-old Fresno State students, Mary Ann Pesci and Anita Lucchesa. Kemper was driving in Berkeley when he picked up 2 18-year-old hitchhiking students from Fresno State University, Mary Ann Pesci and Anita Mary Lucchesa, who were trying to visit friends at Stanford University. He drove them to a remote area, shot them, and then did something that revealed the true depths of his depravity. Kemper again brought his victims' bodies back to his mother's house. This time he beheaded them in his car and carried the headless corpses into his mother's house to have sexual intercourse with them. What followed was a ritual of dismemberment and disposal that he would perfect over the coming months. Edmund's method was as calculating as it was horrifying. He would cruise the highways looking for young women hitchhiking, often college students from UC Santa Cruz or nearby campuses. His massive size and gentle demeanor made potential victims feel safe. He picked up hitchhiking college students and took them to isolated areas where he shot, stabbed, smothered, or strangled them. But killing them was only the beginning. He then took their bodies back to his home, where he decapitated them, engaged in necrophilic acts with their corpses, and then dismembered them. Edmund kept the heads of his victims for days, using them for sexual gratification before finally disposing of them. In one particularly disturbing case, Kemper kept Scholl's severed head for several days, regularly engaging in erumatio with it, then buried it in his mother's garden, facing upward toward her bedroom. After his arrest, he stated that he did this because his mother always wanted people to look up to her. Between May 1972 and February 1973, Edmund killed 6 young women. Each murder followed the same pattern: the friendly pickup, the isolated killing, the necrophilia, and the methodical disposal. Kemper has stated in interviews that he often searched for victims after having arguments with his mother. Psychiatrists and Kemper himself have espoused the belief that the young women were surrogates for his ultimate target, his mother. The Santa Cruz area was in panic. 3 different serial killers were operating simultaneously, earning the region the nickname Murder Capital of the World. But Edmund remained undetected, partly because of his friendship with local police officers who would never suspect the gentle giant they knew and liked. In April 1973, Kemper committed what would be his last 2 murders. On Good Friday, he went to his mother's home, where the two had an unpleasant exchange. Kemper attacked his mother after she went to sleep, first striking her in the head with a hammer and then cutting her throat with a knife. What he did next revealed the full extent of his psychological damage. As he had with his other victims, he then decapitated her and cut off her hands, but then also removed her larynx and put it down the garbage disposal. Later, he would tell police that he threw his mother's larynx down the garbage disposal because it seemed appropriate, since she had screamed at him his entire life. Kemper culminated his 11-month murder spree in 1973, bludgeoning his mother to death with a claw hammer, later having sex with her decapitated head, and then using it as a dartboard. The ultimate target of his rage was finally dead, but Edmund wasn't finished. He called his mother's best friend, Sally Hallett, and invited her over. When she arrived, he strangled her and hid her body in a closet. With his killing spree complete, Edmund drove east, eventually stopping in Colorado. Kemper fled the area the next day, driving east until he reached Pueblo, Colorado, where on April the 23rd, he made a call to the Santa Cruz police to confess his crimes. When police in Santa Cruz received his call, they initially didn't believe him. Big Ed was their friend, not a serial killer. But Edmund was insistent, providing details only the killer could know. But when Kemper later confessed to killing 6 female hitchhikers in California in 1972 and 1973, as well as his mother and her best friend, the police didn't believe him at first. Eventually, they had no choice but to accept the horrifying truth. The gentle giant they had befriended was one of the most prolific serial killers in California history. At his trial in 1973, Edmund exhibited the same cold intelligence that had made him such an effective killer. When asked by the judge what he thought his punishment should be, Kemper said that he should be tortured to death. Instead, He received 8 concurrent life sentences and was sent to the California Medical Facility, where he remains today. Perhaps most disturbing of all, Edmund continued to fascinate and manipulate even from behind bars. In the years to come, while incarcerated in the California Medical Facility, where he still lives, Kemper, who reportedly has an IQ, Brianna Fox, PhD, former FBI agent and researcher at the Bureau's Behavioral Science Unit, and current assistant professor of criminology at the University of South Florida, talks to A&E True Crime about whether convicted serial killers are the key to catching active serial killers. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit began interviewing Edmund in the 1970s, seeking to understand the mind of a serial killer. His articulate explanations of his crimes would help shape the field of criminal profiling. But as experts note, Kemper knew what he did was wrong, but he also was aware that if he were released into society, he would commit those crimes once again. Today, at 75 years old, Edmund Kemper remains in prison. At 75, Kemper has diabetes and suffered a stroke years ago. He also has coronary heart disease and a pacemaker. He is confined to a wheelchair. He has been denied parole repeatedly, most recently in 2024, and will next be eligible in 2031. A psychiatric evaluation in April ranked him as high risk to reoffend. Even in his frail state, experts believe he would kill again if given the opportunity. In denying parole, the board cited an incident in 2022 when Kemper grabbed a prison staffer on the buttocks as he was being moved to his wheelchair. When asked why he did it, his response was chilling. "I just wanted to change the mood. What privilege can they take away from me? I'm already here." The case of Edmund Kemper serves as a terrifying reminder that evil can lurk behind the most unremarkable facades. Still, the true crime tale of Edmund Kemper is particularly fascinating because the man many people called a gentle giant was a near genius whose cunning manipulation of others made him particularly depraved and dangerous. His ability to befriend the very police officers investigating his crimes, his manipulation of the psychiatric system, and his calculated approach to murder made him one of the most dangerous killers in American history. Most haunting of all is what might have been prevented. Had the system recognized the true nature of the 15-year-old who killed his grandparents in cold blood, 6 young women might still be alive today. Instead, Edmund Kemper's story stands as a chilling testament to the consequences of underestimating evil and the deadly price of giving monsters second chances. From the sweet laughter that earned her the nickname Giggling Granny, Nanny Doss seemed like nothing more than a loving grandmother with a charming smile. But behind that cheerful facade lurked one of America's most methodical family annihilators, a woman who would poison 11 of her own relatives over nearly 3 decades. Born Nancy Hazel on November 4th, 1905, in Blue Mountain, Alabama, Nanny's childhood was marked by profound dysfunction that would shape her twisted worldview. Her father, James Hazel, was controlling and abusive, forcing his children to work on the family farm rather than attend school. This resulted in Nanny's poor academic performance and limited education, as he refused to let them attend school regularly. But it was a seemingly minor accident that Nanny would later blame for her murderous tendencies. When she was 7 years old, while riding a train to visit relatives in southern Alabama, the train suddenly stopped and she hit her head on a metal bar on the seat in front of her. For years afterward, she suffered severe headaches, blackouts, and depression. She would later blame her mental instability and destructive behavior on that accident. Starved of affection and escape from her harsh reality, young Nanny found solace in an unlikely source. During her childhood, her favorite hobby was reading her mother's romance magazines and dreaming of her own romantic future. Her favorite part was the Lonely Hearts column, and she became obsessed with these romantic publications. Romance provided her with an escape into a reverie of delightful images of knights in shining armor carrying her off to Wonderland. Her father's control extended to forbidding his daughters from wearing makeup and attractive clothing, as he believed it would prevent them from being molested by men. He also forbade them from attending dances and other social events. This repressive environment only intensified Nanny's yearning for the romantic ideals she found in her magazines. At age 16, Nanny married Charlie Braggs, a co-worker at a linen factory, after only 4 months of dating and with her father's approval. Braggs was the only son of a single mother who insisted on continuing to live with him after he married, completely taking over Nanny's life when they wed. The marriage was far from the romantic fantasy she had envisioned. The marriage produced 4 daughters between 1923 and 1927, but the stress of living with her controlling mother-in-law proved overwhelming. The stressed-out Nanny started drinking, and her casual smoking habit became a heavy addiction. Both unhappy partners correctly suspected each other of infidelity, and Braggs often disappeared for days on end. It was in 1927 that Nanny's murderous career began. That year, the couple lost their 2 middle daughters to suspected food poisoning. One moment the children were perfectly healthy, and then suddenly they died without an apparent cause. The mysterious deaths aroused Charlie's suspicions, and he made a decision that would save his life. The couple divorced in 1928, with Braggs taking his older daughter Melvina with him and leaving the newborn Florine with his ex-wife and mother. Charlie Braggs would earn the dubious distinction of being the only husband not to die at the hands of Nanny. Just a year after her divorce, Doss married her second husband, Frank Harrelson, an abusive alcoholic from Jacksonville, Florida, whom she met through a Lonely Hearts column. Harrelson wooed her with romantic letters and poetry, while Doss responded with racy letters and photos. But like her first marriage, this union would prove far from her romantic ideals. The marriage soon became rocky, owing largely to Harrelson's alcoholism and violent temper. It was during this 16-year marriage that Nanny's killing spree escalated beyond her own children. She most likely killed her own newborn granddaughter with a hairpin to the brain shortly after birth, according to accounts from family members who were in the hospital at the time. A few months later, she likely killed her 2-year-old grandson Robert when he was left in her care. He died suddenly of asphyxia, and several months after his death, Nanny collected on a $500 life insurance policy she had taken out on him. The marriage to Frank lasted 16 years, until one evening in 1945, when he came home drunk after a night of revelry with friends who had returned from service in World War II. That night would be his last. Like her previous victims, Frank Harrelson died under mysterious circumstances. though Nanny had perfected her method by then. Her weapon of choice was deceptively simple and readily available. Nanny used her favorite form of homicide, prunes salted with rat arsenic. A common household ingredient at the time was a potent way to kill people without anyone suspecting a thing. The grinning granny's calling card was to poison her loved ones with drinks or food spiked with huge amounts of poison. After Frank's death, Nanny continued her pattern of seeking new husbands through Lonely Hearts advertisements. Her third husband was Arlie Lanning, and her fourth was Richard Morton. Both would die under suspicious circumstances, victims of the same arsenic poisoning that had claimed Frank Harrelson. With each death, Nanny collected insurance money, providing her with both financial gain and the twisted satisfaction of controlling life and death. In June 1953, Nanny married Samuel Doss of Tulsa, Oklahoma, a Nazarene minister who had lost his family to a tornado in Carroll County, Arkansas. She had boarded a bus to Tulsa to meet Samuel, and they were married soon after. He was neither an alcoholic, nor abusive, nor a womanizer. A devout Christian, he actually did care about her. She still found faults in him. He did not allow non-educational, non-enlightening TV shows and magazines in the house, and disliked the romance novels and stories that his wife adored. Samuel disapproved of the romance novels and stories that his wife cherished. For a woman whose entire fantasy life revolved around romantic fiction, this restriction felt like the ultimate betrayal. In September 1954, Samuel was admitted to the hospital with flu-like symptoms. The hospital diagnosed a severe digestive tract infection. He was treated and released on October 5th. He had been hospitalized after eating an arsenic-laced prune cake, showing flu-like symptoms that were diagnosed as a severe digestive tract infection. Samuel died on October 12, 1954. Nanny killed him that evening in her rush to collect the 2 life insurance policies she had taken out on him. She used her tried and tested method of arsenic in coffee. But this final murder would prove to be her undoing. Samuel's sudden death alerted his doctor, who ordered an autopsy. The autopsy revealed a huge amount of arsenic in his system. Inside his system was enough arsenic to have killed a horse. Nanny was promptly arrested in 1954. What followed was perhaps the most chilling aspect of Nanny's crimes: her reaction to being caught. When arrested, she chuckled, and she continued to chuckle through the ensuing police interrogation, even as she named the men she killed. Journalists gave her the nickname Giggling Granny because every time she would tell the story of how she killed her late husbands, she laughed. The press also dubbed her the Jolly Widow. During police interrogation, Nanny was smiling and giggling, not showing any signs of guilt or fear. She kept saying that her conscience was clear. Pressing her with questions, Nanny started confessing one crime at a time. After each confession, she said, "Now my conscience is clear." Doss confessed to killing 4 of her husbands, her mother, her sister, her grandson, and her mother-in-law, but denied killing other family members. In all, it was revealed that she had killed 4 husbands, 2 children, 1 of her sisters, her mother, 2 grandsons, and a mother-in-law, admitting to murdering 11 of her family members. Despite being a serial killer, Nanny enjoyed her fame. She kept giggling and smiling during her trial, even making jokes about the recipes she used to cook and poison. Whether because of embarrassment or to cover a mean streak that burned inside, she never quite showed remorse. The state of Oklahoma centered its case only on Samuel Doss. Nanny Doss was prosecuted by J. Howard Edmondson, who later became governor of Oklahoma. She pled guilty on May 17, 1955, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. The state did not pursue the death penalty due to her sex. Doss was never charged with the other deaths. She died from leukemia in the hospital ward of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in 1965, exactly 10 years after she was first taken into custody. She was 59 years old. Authorities suspect she killed as many as 12 people, most of whom were blood-related. The true extent of her crimes may never be fully known, as many suspicious deaths in her family were never thoroughly investigated. Her method was so simple, so domestic, that it allowed her to operate undetected for nearly 3 decades. Nanny Doss represents something particularly terrifying in the realm of serial killers, the wolf in grandmother's clothing. While most serial killers are driven by sexual sadism, power fantasies, or psychotic breaks from reality, Nanny was motivated by something far more pedestrian, yet equally chilling. These cases illuminate something deeply unsettling about the nature of evil. Albert Fish appeared kind and trusting, yet once alone with his victims, the monster inside him was unleashed, while Edmund Kemper's very high IQ made him the ideal person law enforcement would want to interview, using his intelligence to provide insights into the minds of serial killers. Randy Kraft looked nothing like how the media portrays a serial killer. He looked like everyone else. Meanwhile, Dorothea Puente charmed tenants and neighbors alike, and Nanny Doss giggled her way through multiple funerals while secretly planning her next poisoning. What makes these killers particularly terrifying isn't just their brutality, but their ability to weaponize trust. They understood something fundamental about human psychology, that we instinctively want to believe in goodness, especially from those who appear harmless or helpful. Fish lured children from their homes, tortured them in various ways, and as time went on, his sexual fantasies with children grew more fiendish and bizarre, often ending in murdering and cannibalizing them. Yet to the outside world, he remained that quiet, unassuming older man who blended into any crowd. Kemper told police that he just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma, and his crimes were deemed incomprehensible for a 15-year-old to commit. But this wasn't random violence born of teenage angst. It was calculated experimentation. Kemper was a cunning serial killer who raped corpses, mutilated dead bodies, and buried his victims' heads in his backyard, using his high IQ of 145 to slip away from his crime scenes undetected. His intelligence became a weapon, allowing him to manipulate psychiatrists and law enforcement while maintaining the facade of being reformed. Randy Kraft was referred to as the scorecard killer for a coded list of more than 60 entries believed to correspond to victims, mostly young men and Marines, whom he tortured, raped, and murdered before dumping their bodies. His methodical nature was perhaps the most chilling aspect of his crimes. On top of his confirmed murders, he might have been responsible for 40 other murders, according to a mysterious list called Kraft's Scorecard, which ended up giving Kraft his title as the Scorecard Killer. This wasn't passion or rage, it was bookkeeping. He He turned murder into an accounting exercise, tracking his victims like a businessman tracks sales figures. Each of these killers developed sophisticated methods for selecting and approaching victims. Fish preyed on children from broken homes or those whose disappearances might not be immediately noticed. Many of his victims were poor, including African Americans, about whom he said the police were less apt to care. Kemper targeted young female hitchhikers, exploiting the free-spirited culture of the 1970s when picking up strangers seemed relatively safe. Kraft lured two youths from a Long Beach parking lot into his Ford Mustang, giving them beer and Valium as he drove in a random, aimless manner. Puente targeted elderly tenants dependent on Social Security checks, while Nanny Doss chose family members whose deaths would seem natural given their age or health conditions. But perhaps most disturbing is how long they operated undetected. Fish admitted to molesting more than 400 children and torturing and killing several of them, suggesting decades of predatory behavior before his capture. Kemper went on an 11-month killing spree between May 1972 and April 1973, butchering 5 college students, a high school student, his mother, and her best friend. Kraft's first known sex attack was in 1970 with his final crime in May 1983, and while 16 victims are known, it is believed there could be up to 67 victims in total. Puente operated her boarding house of horrors for years, and Nanny Doss's killing spree spanned multiple decades and marriages. Their methods of disposal revealed their calculated nature. Kemper raped the bodies, then dismembered them, placed the body parts into plastic bags, and disposed of them, hiding his victims somewhere in a ravine near Loma Prieta Mountain. Kraft often dumped victims along freeways, earning him the Freeway Killer moniker. Fish would often dismember his victims and scatter the remains across multiple locations, making identification difficult. Puente buried her victims in her garden, literally planting flowers over their graves, while Nanny Doss relied on poison that mimicked natural causes of death. The psychological profiles of these killers reveal a common thread. They were organized, patient, and remarkably self-controlled in public settings. An FBI profile described the killer as a methodical, organized lust killer of above-average intelligence who exhibited an indifference to the interests and welfare of society. This wasn't about losing control. It was about maintaining absolute control over their victims' lives and deaths. Kemper culminated his 11-month murder spree in 1973, bludgeoning his mother to death with a claw hammer, later having sex with her decapitated head, and then using it as a dartboard. This final act wasn't just murder, it was the ultimate expression of his hatred and need for dominance. Yet even after this grotesque crime, he maintained enough composure to call police and turn himself in, demonstrating the calculated nature of his actions. The investigation and capture of these killers often came down to chance or small mistakes rather than brilliant detective work. Kraft was captured on May 18, 1983, when he was pulled over by 2 highway patrol officers for driving erratically on Interstate 5, and patrol officers went to speak with the passenger in Kraft's car, only to find him dead. Fish was caught because he sent a letter to his victim's family, unable to resist taunting them with details of his crimes. Kemper turned himself in. Puente's crimes were discovered when social workers finally investigated missing tenants. Nanny Doss was caught only when her final husband's suspicious death prompted an autopsy. Their trials revealed the depth of their depravity and their complete lack of remorse. Charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder, Kemper went on trial for his crimes. In October 1973, was found guilty of all charges, and when asked by the judge what he thought his punishment should be, Kemper said that he should be tortured to death. Even in facing ultimate punishment, these killers showed no genuine remorse, only frustration at being caught or theatrical displays of emotion designed to manipulate the system. What these cases ultimately teach us is that evil doesn't announce itself with dramatic flourishes or obvious warning signs. It wears a friendly face, offers help when you're vulnerable, and strikes when you're least prepared to defend yourself. These monsters are rarely what you expect, representing the banality of evil description applied to some of the worst serial killers in U.S. history. Banal, boring, and unoriginal, hardly the stuff of nightmares. Yet they were responsible for hundreds of deaths and immeasurable suffering that rippled through families and communities for generations. The lesson isn't to become paranoid or lose faith in humanity, but to understand that predators exist and they're skilled at exploiting our natural tendency to trust. They study us, learn our weaknesses, and use our compassion against us. In a world where we want to believe the best about people, these killers remind us that some individuals have abandoned their humanity entirely, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a person wrapped around an insatiable appetite for control, suffering, and death. Understanding these monsters doesn't make them less dangerous, but it does make us more aware of the masks evil can wear and the lengths it will go to satisfy its appetite for destruction. But while we've explored the individual stories of these terrifying killers, the patterns that emerge from their crimes reveal disturbing truths about human nature itself. Understanding the dark psychology behind them is your best defense. Behind every charming facade, there's potential manipulation, control, and devastation. The question that haunts criminologists and families of victims alike isn't just how these monsters operated, but how they managed to remain invisible for so long, hiding their true nature behind masks of normalcy. Serial killers often employ a mask of sanity to hide their true psychopathic tendencies and appear normal, even charming. The killers are masters at appearing quite normal, harmless, and even helpful. This ability to blend seamlessly into society isn't accidental. It's a carefully cultivated skill. Serial killers who hide out in plain sight are able to do so precisely because they look just like everyone else. It is their ability to blend in that makes them very dangerous, frightening, and yet very compelling to the general public. Albert Fish appeared to be nothing more than a gentle grandfather, his gray hair and kind demeanor disarming those who encountered him. Edmund Kemper's imposing physical presence was offset by his articulate speech and seemingly cooperative nature with law enforcement. These weren't accidents of personality. They were weapons as deadly as any knife or gun. Psychopaths are social chameleons who rarely stand out in a crowd. This characteristic makes them unobtrusive and therefore difficult to apprehend. Randy Kraft could sit in a bar, buy drinks for strangers, and engage in friendly conversation while mentally cataloging potential victims. Dorothea Puente baked cookies for her neighbors and attended church regularly, her maternal appearance providing the perfect cover for her deadly schemes. A cool and unemotional demeanor, combined with a keen intellect and a charming personality, make the psychopath a very effective predator. The psychological mechanisms that enable this deception run deeper than simple acting. Serial killers are able to kill their victims without remorse or guilt by looking at their victims as objects instead of human beings. This helps serial killers dissociate themselves from the heinous act and allows them to seek pleasure through their actions. This objectification allows them to maintain their public personas without the emotional weight of their crimes affecting their daily interactions. They don't see the people around them as potential friends or acquaintances, but as either useful tools or potential prey. Psychopathy refers to social predators who charm, manipulate, and ruthlessly plow their way through life, completely lacking in conscience and feeling for others. They selfishly take what they want and do as they please, violating social norms and expectations without the slightest sense of guilt or regret. This complete absence of empathy creates a terrifying advantage. While normal people struggle with guilt, second thoughts, or emotional connections that might prevent them from harming others, these killers operate without such constraints. What makes this even more disturbing is how successful many of them were at maintaining long-term relationships and careers. Even Ridgway's wife of 13 years, Judith Lorraine Lynch, also never expected that the person that she had married and had kids with was the Green River Killer, particularly someone with the ability to take human life without remorse and possessed the ability to stay under the radar for almost a decade. These killers didn't just fool strangers, they deceived the people closest to them, sometimes for decades. The development of these manipulative abilities often traces back to childhood experiences. Many serial killers are survivors of early childhood trauma of some kind, physical or sexual abuse, family dysfunction, emotionally distant or absent parents. Trauma is the single recurring theme in the biographies of most killers. As a consequence of this trauma, they suppress their emotional response. This emotional suppression, while initially a survival mechanism, becomes a tool for manipulation and control. They never learn the appropriate responses to trauma and never develop other emotions, which is why they find it difficult to empathize with others. However, not all individuals who experience trauma become killers. Not all abused children become serial killers, and not all serial killers are victims of childhood abuse. However, the connection between the two cannot be dismissed as just coincidence. The difference lies in how these individuals process and respond to their experiences. Those who become serial killers often develop what psychologists call a warrior gene, where dominance-seeking behavior conferred reproductive advantages, explaining why neural pathways reinforcing aggression, risk-taking, and control over others became selectively retained. The true horror lies not just in their crimes, but in how easily they moved through society. Stories like Ridgway's are real-life examples of how these murderous beings, known as serial killers, can live among us with no notable signs. Therefore, from the people we pass down the street to the person we politely open the door for, we can never be too sure what people are capable of, as the most dangerous killers are the ones that hide in plain sight. For the families of victims, this realization adds another layer of trauma. Not only did they lose loved ones to violence, but they must grapple with the knowledge that the killer likely appeared normal, perhaps even helpful or charming to those around them. Nearly 90% of victims were complete strangers to the killer, and that only 3% were friends, and 1% were that of family members. This explains why serial killers are able to get away with the massacres for so incredibly long. The randomness of victim selection means that in many cases, there was nothing the victims could have done differently. They simply had the misfortune of crossing paths with a predator who saw them not as human beings, but as objects to fulfill twisted fantasies. The lasting impact on communities extends far beyond the immediate victims and their families. Multiple and serial murders are rare events that have a very profound societal impact. When residents learn that a killer lived among them undetected, it shatters their sense of security. Neighbors begin to question what they really know about the people around them. The trust that binds communities together erodes, replaced by suspicion and fear. Law enforcement faces the daunting challenge of identifying these individuals before they strike again. When detectives go to investigate the disappearances of those missing, there is no link between the killer and the victim, making it practically impossible to solve these mysteries. Traditional investigative methods that rely on connections between perpetrator and victim often fail when dealing with serial killers who specifically target strangers. The psychological profile of these killers reveals a chilling truth about the nature of evil itself. It is important to recognize that psychopathic serial killers know right from wrong and are able to comprehend criminal law. In particular, they know that murder violates the laws and mores of society. They do understand that they are subject to society's rules, but they disregard them to satisfy their own selfish interests and desires. This isn't madness in any traditional sense. It's a calculated choice to prioritize their own desires over the lives and safety of others. Perhaps most disturbing is their complete emotional detachment from their crimes. A lack of interpersonal empathy and disregard for the suffering of their victims are key characteristics of psychopathic serial killers. They generally do not feel anger toward their victims. Instead, they are more likely to feel cool indifference toward them. This emotional void means they can commit horrific acts without the psychological burden that would stop normal individuals. The stories of Albert Fish, Edmund Kemper, Randy Kraft, Dorothea Puente, and Nanny Doss serve as stark reminders that evil doesn't always announce itself with the obvious warning signs. It often wears a pleasant smile, offers help when needed, and blends seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life. These killers succeeded not because they were particularly clever or skilled, but because they understood one fundamental truth about human nature. We want to trust, we want to believe in the goodness of others, and we want to feel safe in our communities. They weaponized these natural human tendencies, turning our greatest strengths as a social species into vulnerabilities they could exploit. Their legacy isn't just the lives they took, but the innocence they stole from entire communities. They proved that the monster under the bed isn't hiding in the shadows. It's sitting next to us at the church pew, serving us coffee at the local diner, or living quietly in the house next door. And perhaps that's the most terrifying lesson of all. In a world where true evil can wear such an ordinary face, vigilance and awareness become not just virtues, but necessities for survival. What was supposed to be a romantic golden anniversary celebration turned into one of the most chilling revelations in American criminal history. It was October 1954 when 65-year-old Samuel Doss, a gentle Nazarene minister from Tulsa, Oklahoma, suddenly collapsed in his home after drinking what he thought was his wife's loving gesture, a cup of freshly brewed coffee. Within hours, he was dead, leaving behind a grieving widow who seemed utterly devastated by her loss. But when the doctor who had treated Samuel during a recent hospitalization insisted on an autopsy, the horrifying truth emerged from the examination table. The autopsy revealed a huge amount of arsenic in his system, enough poison to kill a horse. The sweet, giggling grandmother named Nanny Doss had methodically murdered her husband, just as she had done to countless other family members over nearly 3 decades of calculated killing. Nanny Doss was an American serial killer responsible for the deaths of 11 people between 1927 and 1954. Doss was also referred to as the Giggling Granny, the Lonely Hearts Killer, the Black Widow, and Lady Bluebeard. But unlike the violent, explosive killers we often imagine, Nanny's weapon of choice was far more insidious. She turned the most intimate acts of care, cooking meals, brewing coffee, preparing desserts, into instruments of death. Nanny was born on November 4th, 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama, into a world that would shape her into one of America's most prolific family annihilators. Both Nanny and her mother hated James, who was a controlling and abusive father and husband. James would force his children to work on the family farm, refusing to let them attend school, creating an environment of oppression that would fester into something far darker. When she was 7 years old, she suffered a head injury while riding a train. For years, she had severe headaches, blackouts, and depression. During her childhood, Nanny found joy in reading her mother's romance magazines, and she dreamed about having her own romantic future. These romance magazines became more than escapism. They became an obsession that would drive her to murder. In her own words, Doss's romance magazines had a profound effect on her psyche. I was searching for the perfect mate, the real romance in life. When one husband became too much, Doss simply killed him off and moved to the next love, or victim, that is. At 16, Nanny married her first husband, Charlie Braggs, but the fairy tale quickly soured. When Nanny was a teenager, she married her first husband, Charlie Braggs, a co-worker at a linen factory that she worked at. The two had only been dating for 4 months, but James approved of the marriage. Braggs was the only son of a single mother who wanted to continue living with him. Living with an overbearing mother-in-law and an increasingly distant husband, Nanny's resentment began to manifest in deadly ways. In 1927, the couple lost their 2 middle girls to suspected food poisoning. Soon after, Braggs took firstborn daughter Melvina and fled, leaving newborn Florin behind. Braggs always maintained he left her because he was frightened of her. He was the only husband who would survive Nanny Doss because he recognized the danger and ran. What followed was a parade of husbands who would meet their end through Nanny's preferred method. Poison slipped into everyday meals and drinks. Her second husband was Robert Franklin Harrelson. They met and married in 1929. After a few months, she discovered that he was an alcoholic and had a criminal record for assault. Despite this, the marriage lasted 16 years. In 1945, Harrelson allegedly raped Nanny. The next day, she put rat poison in Harrelson's corn whiskey jar, and he died that evening. But Nanny had grown careless. This sudden death alerted his doctor, who ordered an autopsy. The autopsy revealed a huge amount of arsenic in his system. Surprisingly, she wasn't caught yet. Nanny's killing spree wasn't limited to husbands. Exhausted from labor and groggy from ether, Melvina thought she saw her visiting mother stick a hat pin into the baby's head. When she asked her husband and sister for clarification, they said Nanny had told them the baby was dead, and they noticed that she was holding a pin. Even her own grandchildren weren't safe from her murderous impulses. While Melvina was visiting her father after a particularly nasty fight with her mother, her son Robert died mysteriously under Nanny's care on July 7th, 1945. The death was diagnosed as asphyxia from unknown causes, and 2 months later, Nanny collected the $500 life insurance she had taken out on Robert. Through Lonely Hearts columns and dating services, Nanny continued to find new victims. Looking for yet another husband, Nanny joined a dating service called the Diamond Circle Club and soon met Richard L. Morton of Jamestown, North Carolina. They married in 1952 in Emporia, Kansas. He did not have a drinking problem, but he was adulterous. Before she poisoned him, she poisoned her mother, Louisa, in January 1953 when she came to live with them. Morton died 3 months later on May 19, 1953. The pattern was becoming clear. Anyone who crossed Nanny or failed to meet her romantic fantasies was marked for death. Her final victim would be her undoing. Nanny married Samuel Doss of Tulsa, Oklahoma, in June 1953. Doss was a Nazarene minister who had lost his family to a tornado in Carroll County, Arkansas. Samuel disapproved of the romance novels and stories that his wife adored. For Nanny, this was intolerable. A man who stood between her and her beloved romance magazines was a man who had to die. She laced a prune cake with poison. Samuel Doss spent a month recovering in the hospital. A few days after he got home, poison-laced coffee finished him off. The doctor who treated her fifth and final husband had suspected foul play during his month-long hospitalization, but he had no proof. So the doctor convinced Doss, who was to receive 2 life insurance benefits after the fifth husband's death, to let him perform an autopsy. The physician said it was a good idea because the autopsy would save lives. The doctor found huge amounts of arsenic in Samuel Doss's body and alerted police. When police arrested Nanny in 1954, something extraordinary happened. Instead of showing remorse or fear, she began giggling. When arrested, she chuckled, and she continued to chuckle through the ensuing police interrogation, even as she named the men she killed prune-fed and unsuspecting. The press dubbed her the Giggling Granny and the Jolly Widow. She soon confessed to killing 4 of her 5 ex-husbands, but not her family members. Authorities exhumed some of Doss's previous victims and found extraordinary amounts of arsenic or rat poison in their bodies. But the full extent of her crimes was even more staggering. In all, it was revealed that she had killed 4 husbands, 2 children, 1 of her sisters, her mother, 2 grandsons, and a mother-in-law. Samuel Doss's 1954 murder, which led to Doss's arrest, was the last in what is suspected to be a 27-year killing spree that took at least 11 members of her family's lives. What made Nanny Doss particularly terrifying wasn't just her body count, but her method and motive. Since most of her husbands had other underlying health issues, such as alcoholism or heart conditions, doctors and authorities never suspected a thing. She was the perfect killer hiding in plain sight, a sweet grandmother who baked cakes and brewed coffee, who giggled at her own jokes and seemed to embody harmless domesticity. She killed because she liked it. Prunes, known for their medicinal power of natural elimination, helped her carry out another type of elimination, one husband after another. The domestic sphere that was supposed to represent safety and nurturing became her hunting ground. She eventually admitted she poisoned her husband because he refused to let her watch her favorite television program. She later confessed to killing her second husband, Frank Harrelson, her third husband, Arlie J. Lanning, and her fourth husband, Richard L. Morton Sr. The banality of her motives was perhaps the most chilling aspect of all. She pled guilty on May 17, 1955, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. The state did not pursue the death penalty due to her sex. Doss was never charged with the other deaths. She died from leukemia in the hospital ward of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in 1965. The case of Nanny Doss reveals a disturbing truth about evil. It doesn't always announce itself with dramatic violence or obvious warning signs. Sometimes it smiles sweetly, offers you a home-cooked meal, and giggles while describing how it slowly poisoned 11 family members over 3 decades. Her story forces us to confront the terrifying reality that the most dangerous predators are often those we trust most completely, those who share our beds, our meals, and our most intimate moments. In a world where we're taught to fear strangers lurking in dark alleys, Nanny Doss reminds us that sometimes the greatest threat comes from someone who calls you honey, who knows how you like your coffee, and who smiles as they watch you drink it. The giggling granny didn't just kill her victims, she turned the very concept of home and family into a weapon, proving that evil can wear the most innocent face of all. The chilling reality we've explored in these cases reveals a disturbing truth about human nature and our vulnerabilities as a society. These killers, Albert Fish, Edmund Kemper, Randy Kraft, Dorothea Puente, and Nanny Doss, succeeded not because they were superhuman monsters, but precisely because they understood how to exploit our most fundamental social bonds. They weaponized trust, manipulated our compassion, and turned our basic human instincts against us. What makes these cases so terrifying isn't just their brutality, but how effortless their deception appeared. They were adept at gaining trust through good looks, apparent kindness, and manufactured vulnerability. Remember, charm can sometimes mask the most dangerous intentions. Fish presented himself as a harmless grandfather figure, his gray whiskers and gentle demeanor concealing decades of unimaginable horror. Kemper's towering intellect and articulate manner made him seem like someone you'd want to befriend, not flee from. Kraft's meticulous organization and quiet professionalism allowed him to blend seamlessly into California's suburban landscape while orchestrating systematic murder. Puente exemplified this deception perfectly. The scheming landlord who appeared as nothing more than a caring grandmother, despite the white hair and wrinkles, ruthlessly killing for her own gain. She exploited society's assumption that elderly women are inherently nurturing and harmless. Nanny Doss, dubbed the giggling granny by the press because she was so affable and cheerful, made off with hefty insurance payouts in all the deaths of her victims, her constant laughter serving as the perfect camouflage for her poisonous intentions. This evolutionary tendency explains why so many serial killers use deception, charm, or manipulation to lure victims. Bundy, for instance, feigned injury to gain his victims' trust, a tactic that exploits a well-documented evolutionary tendency for women to respond to perceived vulnerability. These predators didn't just stumble upon effective hunting strategies. They intuitively understood and exploited deeply embedded psychological patterns that have governed human behavior for millennia. Mutual benign control underpins the entirety of social life through various intensities of persuasion, charm, tact, and love. In direct contrast, serial murderers habitually choose coercion and total control, securing their interests through deception, manipulation, intimidation, or threats. They pervert the very mechanisms that allow civilized society to function, turning our social contracts into weapons against us. The truly disturbing aspect of these cases isn't just what these killers did, but how long they were able to do it. Fish operated for decades before his letter to the Budd family led to his capture. Kemper convinced psychiatrists of his sanity and rehabilitation. Kraft's scorecard system allowed him to track dozens of victims while maintaining his facade as an ordinary computer programmer. Puente buried bodies in her garden while neighbors praised her kindness. Doss giggled her way through family gatherings after poisoning relatives, collecting insurance money with a smile. These cases highlighted the importance of understanding the minds of criminals who can blend seamlessly into society. Insights drawn from their behaviors and tactics continue to inform current practices in law enforcement and psychology, enhancing safeguards against similarly deceptive individuals. But the lessons extend far beyond law enforcement. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the society we've built. Most people never see it coming, but they don't have to be one of them. Understanding these patterns gives us the tools to recognize psychological traps before they ensnare us or someone we care about. The warning signs were often there, buried beneath layers of manufactured charm and carefully constructed personas. Neighbors occasionally noticed odd smells, strange hours, or inconsistent stories, but social politeness and the benefit of the doubt often silenced their concerns. Behind every charming facade, there's potential manipulation, control, and devastation. And while serial killers are extreme, the tactics they use aren't. They show up in everyday life, even at work. The manipulation techniques these killers employed, the false vulnerability, the manufactured trust, the exploitation of social norms, exist on a spectrum that includes far more common forms of predatory behavior. These 5 cases represent more than just individual pathology. They reveal systematic failures in how we assess danger, grant trust, and protect the vulnerable members of our society. They represent a dual failure of their own development as full-fledged productive individuals and of the culture and society they grow in. In a pathologically narcissistic civilization, social abnormalities proliferate, breeding malignant objectifiers devoid of empathy. The children these killers once were, Fish with his religious obsessions and sadomasochistic fantasies, Kemper with his violent rage toward his controlling mother, Kraft with his methodical need for organization and control, Puente with her history of fraud and manipulation, Doss with her head injury and fascination with death, were walking red flags that society failed to recognize or address. Their transformations into monsters weren't sudden eruptions of evil, but gradual progressions that unfolded over years and decades. Perhaps the most chilling realization is how these cases challenge our fundamental assumptions about safety and trust. We want to believe that evil announces itself, that monsters look monstrous, that danger carries obvious warning signs. But these killers succeeded precisely because they understood how to subvert those expectations. They looked like the people we're taught to trust: the grandfather, the helpful young man, the professional, the landlady, the grandmother. In a world where genuine human connection requires vulnerability and trust, these cases remind us of the delicate balance between openness and caution. They don't suggest we should become paranoid or withdrawn, but rather that we should develop more sophisticated ways of assessing character and recognizing manipulation. The price of ignoring these lessons isn't just academic. It's measured in the lives of victims who trusted the wrong person at the wrong moment. These 5 killers may be gone, but the patterns they exploited remain. The vulnerabilities they exposed in our social fabric persist. The techniques they perfected continue to be employed by other predators who understand that the most effective monsters are often the ones who look least monstrous. Their legacy isn't just the trail of bodies they left behind, but the uncomfortable truth that evil often wears the most innocent face, and the most dangerous predators are often the ones we never see coming until it's far too late.